Good morning, which it is morning for this side of the globe, and this side would include myself here, Steve Holzer with BIMobject in Burbank. Been joined this morning with my esteemed colleague and co-host. Our moderator today is Matthew Jackson Scarnstead. Matthew, how are you doing? Are you there?
I'm here. Thank you. Very well. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. Yeah, it is definitely morning here. 11 o'clock, cloudy. Autumn has arrived in Europe, I think is the best way to say it.
Oh, don't even say that.
Really.
Yeah, well, it is morning here, but as you can see behind me out the windows, it's still pretty dark. The sun hasn't made it around this side of the globe yet, so we'll be catching up soon, but we're always just a few hours behind you folks. Anyway, thanks for joining us this morning. We got folks filing in here. As always, this isn't church, so take seats in the front here. Listen close. We're going to get kicked off. We're talking today about digital twins. It's one of my favorite types of things. It's a buzzword. You know, it's being used in so many ways, and you know, the long and short of it is it's not tightly defined yet. So we get a lot of questions about this. You know, what is this digital twin? What is that thing all about? So hopefully we're going to all learn together a little bit and kind of take a perspective of where we're at in this industry with this new latest buzzword, digital twin. So with that, let's get during today's discussion. All the housekeeping always has to happen. Those of you that have been on here for a while probably already know this piece by heart, but nonetheless, we want to make sure everybody understands how to get the most out of the experience. So any questions you have, Matthew is eagle-eyed and watching very closely in the question panel and the chat panel. He will throw the anchor out, say, Steve, hang on. This we have this wonderful question from someone that applies exactly to what you were saying, or Steve, what you just said didn't really make any sense. Can you help us understand what you're trying to tell us? So ask away. That's the big thing. Anything that you ask in the chat panel, and sometimes we get some that people maybe just want a question about maybe one of the prior webinars or even other items for the industry. If they don't really apply in this webinar, we'll answer them, and we may even be using them for a topic on a future webinar. So we'll address them afterwards. Wrong direction. Got to get my arrows straight here. So this discussion is being recorded. It'll be available to attendees and absentees for review and sharing. Share this out with your colleagues after the fact. It's usually a couple days or less that it comes out. And also know I get a lot of emails. Steve, hey, I got a meeting at that slot. I cannot make that time. Can you send me the recording when you're done? The best thing that you can do is register for the webinar. You will get, whether you attend or not, you will get the follow-up email with a link to that recording. So by all means, never hesitate to register, even if you're not going to be able to actually attend it. And as usual, we got a little bit of a poll, my role poll. Let me share that with you. What we'd like to find out, it really helps me as I'm going through the talk topics to see who's on. You know, what's your role? What's your perspective in this industry? Because it's wide. We have a lot of different folks that actually are leveraging our BIMobject digital content and the whole digital facets of the industry. So this helps us keep it relative and make sure we're addressing everyone in there. It looks like we got a pretty good. Our mix is shifting. This has been interesting, and I'm really glad to see this because we're last few months we've been bringing in a lot more folks are getting engaged out of the later pieces in the building life cycle. Let me go ahead, and looks like we've got the majority have responded. Let's let me go ahead and share this. So I got to share it. It would help if I shared it. A little slow this morning. It must be an early morning. Anyway, so The design community, and the interesting thing, we haven't lost designers. It's actually a lower percentage than it used to be, but what we're getting is a higher percentage of others that are later in the building life cycle, which is good. Because that's one of the important messages we're trying to get out is that this content, that building product manufacturers content that BIMobject provides, is get utilized through that whole building life cycle. And today is one of the other key tools that is leveraged and utilizes this content is the digital twin. So we'll be discussing that at length. Let me hide that. Come back to our slides and let's move on. Okay, so we're kind of continuing our digital content as currency series. We kicked this off a couple of months ago, and I realize many of you have seen this graphic, and I bring it up each time because, again, all of these topics that we've been following on with are part of that full building life cycle, and it's the digital content that is really the currency. It's what makes it work. It greases the gears of this whole machine. So, and I don't need to go through each of the disciplines. We've been through them before. They're all listed out there on the left, and we're getting more folks from the later stage disciplines, which is fantastic. But today we're going to talk about a digital twin, and that digital twin, for visual purposes, really sits on, we've discussed in the past, there's, again, numerous terms, acronyms, everything else for this common data environment. And there were some good questions that came in too. Again, I ask on registration if there's any specific questions, and we'll get to those a little later on in the slides that people had about the digital twin. But anyway, it sits in the middle, and it is actually, that common data environment is really what creates that digital twin over time as it gets built and embellished. So, digital twin, that's today. A couple questions for this talk. What's it got to do with BIM? So we hear this all the time. Well, Steve, we just learned about BIM. Now we've got digital twin. Is this new? Is this different? Is it changing? Go away. And pardon me, you can see I'm having a little challenge. I still have my sling, as I mentioned last week. So I got one arm tied down, and that gets a little bit challenging sometimes, but bear with me. So is this just another buzzword? So I got a little fun thing I want to share with you here coming up. Buzzwords. Man, we're all about these, especially in this industry, but every industry. And I was, as I was putting this together, the digital twin, are buzzwords and acronyms, are they really useful? Does it matter? So you could see some in the graphic there, paradigms, adaptation, change, motivation, disruption. We've also got another set of marketing buzzwords, which really are used to sell products, even holistic, leverage. They're leveraged to sell products. Critical, feedback loop. All these kinds of things become part of our lexicon. And another one of them, BIM. We've gone through that. We've called it Hollywood BIM for years, as I sit here literally footsteps away from Hollywood. And there's a lot of times that these terms are brought into conversations just to either lead somebody to believe that it's cutting edge what you're doing or whatever, but they also end up with a lot of different interpretations. So it all kinds of being a blah, blah, blah after a while. That's what we're going to try to minimize. So I thought I'd put together a brief sentence that recaps what we're doing today. So let's combine some thought leadership with enough bandwidth that we can pivot this ecosystem using disruptive technology like AI and AR to future-proof this industry like rock stars, if we all give 110% and use digital twins. I hope that got all the latest in there. But it almost turns out to be kind of comical when we stand back. And in this industry, and I actually apologize even in my own use of acronyms, we are alphabet soup. Not to coin the term from another large company we all know, but I mean, really we are. We love these acronyms. We bring them in. They're bandied about often without even any understanding of what comprises that acronym, where it came from. So, but can buzzwords be game changers? Let us know what you think in the chat panel. I was just kind of curious putting this together. I think they can be. One brief anecdote that happened to me. I was sponsoring a resolution with the National Association of Home Builders here in the U.S. a few years ago, and it was to recognize our U.S. national BIM standard, which we had just released. And part of that process, I had to go around to a number of different committees and get, present for like 2 or 3 minutes and then be open to questions. And one of the guys asked me, he said, so Steve, I hear this is going to be, what's going to save us in this business, in this industry, this BIM, and more BIM. He goes, but CPM, what happened? 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we all heard CPM this, CPM that. We all had to go to classes and learn CPM. But it's gone. We haven't heard anything about it for years. And I said, yes, sir, you're exactly right. BIM will be just like CPM. In a few years, we won't hear much about BIM anymore. And I said that, I've been saying that for years. And the reason that you don't hear, mister, about CPM anymore is critical path method scheduling is just the default way that everyone schedules a new project. Any project management, any building, whether it's a office building, a hospital, a university, or a home, there's CPM scheduling, critical path method scheduling, and that's just the standard way of doing it. BIM should be the same way. That's the way we build. Digital twin, another piece of it. So what's a digital twin? I got this this photo. I imagine that this might be the digital twin of, or maybe a physical twin of an early moon rocket, but maybe not. But quite simply, it's a dynamic, living, functional. I even submit to you, sometimes it could be an organic, real-time, parallel, virtual model of a process, product, or service. Terrible definition because of the number of items, but I just, again, trying to paint a picture of this container of content and what it does. So it's a digital repository, as I showed in our early graphic, that there we go again. I got another acronym for us, CDE, Common Data Environment. It's a digital repository that may include a model. We had a question, and you'll see that someone asked about, how does the model fit in? It may include a model of an existing device, asset, system, facility, campus, or city. Now, the reason I said I toyed with this, it's an existing, because the digital twin is constructed while the facility is being constructed. So until that facility is constructed, you can't have a fully functional digital twin. So really, it's not a true digital twin until it's emulating that existing facility. Are they something new? We didn't use the term, but I'll tell you, and I almost hate to admit this, but my first understanding came from a discussion with a colleague. I was working for actually it was a facility management system that I was putting in back in the day in ArisCAD, and working side by side with another gentleman who worked on GDS CAD in 1990. And prior to that project, he had worked with many of the aviation manufacturers, and it's not a secret that CATIA came out of aerospace. A lot of the tools we use came out of aerospace, but that was my first understanding. He described to me that we don't draw. We didn't draw a new aircraft. We didn't draw a new aircraft engine. We actually constructed digitally elements, parts, ribs of metal that contained all the properties of that, so that these could all be used in virtualizations. And throughout the design and building and even utilization of these tools. So it was really, heavily used in aerospace and aviation industries. It has been for decades. But Steve, wait a minute. What the heck does aviation and aerospace? How could that? I mean, we're building facilities here. That doesn't apply. Well, aviation, it may involve the life safety for millions of people every day, and that was one of the impetuses they used, that they really needed to. We need to have this figured out before we went flying. But I would challenge that and say buildings contain, are utilized by, and involve billions of people every day. So not just from a life safety perspective, there's so many other aspects that can be harvested for efficiencies, for full utilization, for so many things. Another one of the leading questions that I had on the pre-webinar questions was, who creates the digital twin? Glad you asked. No one person. Everyone creates the digital twin. The digital twin is simultaneously constructed, as is the building, by architects, engineers, construction managers, trade contractors. You can read all the titles. Every person involved in that full building life cycle. And one element that even goes further than the people that are engaged in that facility are the facility patrons. Who's using that facility? You know, for in wayfinding and in even in how utilization of the various different facilities and services within a facility that can be looked at, and managing HVAC systems for occupants and things such as this. It's all part of the digital twin. So the creation, though, of that digital twin being constructed out of Legos, you often heard us talk about here at BIMobject. We use that analogy that it's our digital content is really the Legos of this process. It's an infinite process. The creation, embellishment of this digital twin is an infinite process. How are they being used in the building industry? Well, this is an area where right now it is I won't say it's undefined, but I will say it's defined differently across different maturities of the industry. It's used to manage operations, to make predictions, not just in logistics and delivery of materials to construct that facility, but even predicting out of range parameters for, say, an air filter in an air handler with pressure sensors and IoT. It's being used to look at building loading, and maybe that might be people. Maybe it might be systems. You know, what kind of loads are being imposed on the various electrical systems, pump systems, recirculation systems. This can all be measured and looked at, because that also affects the lifetime. As we talked about total cost ownership, a lot of this impacts how quickly those devices are going to need to be replaced. You know, how are they aging out? It's going to change the maintenance intervals. Instead of just being the manufacturer's recommended 3-month or 6-month update or change out or cleaning, we're using devices, IoT sensors, to actually understand that. Another big one that a lot of people, I think, are missing, and our industry here, the built environment industry, has really got the attention of a lot of insurance and risk assessment industries. These are real big. This data is very valuable, and they really are looking at this and focusing in on how they can mitigate and put aside, forensically from, a system failure or any other challenge within a facility. Forensically, they can rebuild that and understand when failure is going to occur and predict that. Few examples, and again, they're a little bit all over the board. So I hope you weren't expecting me to define a digital twin is blank, and that is it, and there's a standard for digital twins, and that's what it always is. That's not the case yet. Not that it may ever be. But this was a good example I ran across in my research for this talk. Matterport, their CEO called it Mirror World. Again, here we go, another buzzword, but that's their own that they took in at Mirror World. There's a link to the article. It's a pretty good article written on how they were looking at using their, the thing I really liked about Matterport and other scanning technologies like this is often in this industry, we only consider what's going to be built new. You know, how do we make that digital? But the vast majority of these facilities that are being managed by the many of you on this exact webinar, the facility managers and trade contractors and things like that, they were built 10, 15, 50, 100, 200 years ago, maybe even longer. How do we bring those into this digital world? And so we're using tools such as Matterport is just one example to what I call harvest the existing facility and then begin building and embellishing that digital twin data, that common data environment out on top of that. And again, it's an infinite loop, and as that gets used, it's going to get perfected. Another great example was just announced here, and GAFCON is a partner, or we work a lot with GAFCON here in the States and all over the world, actually. They are a very large, in the day they were a general contractor. They have what's called a VDC, or Virtual Design and Construction division, that is now doing a lot of very large project management systems. This article that Construction Dive just did pointed out this $1.2 billion hotel expansion and a $1.5 billion redevelopment, all being done on what GAFCON's calling their one model. Again, they presented at BIMobject Live last year. John Turner, if any of you were there, did a great job and kind of shared with us how they were leveraging this digital content and bringing it into a usable structure for creating a digital twin. When's this digital twin used? At all times. It's used at every phase in early design development through deconstruction. It's not just plans. So again, we need to really be thinking in terms of we are constructing this digital facility, and we're no longer making drawings. Again, you guys all know my take on drawings. It's a built-in errors, and because they're all open to someone's opinion, and any drawing has to be interpreted. So a digital twin, it increases in value as it's used. And I'm talking long after the building and the facility is completed, but it captures the domain expertise of that. It's even being used by owners to look at unleveraged potential profit centers, ways and habits of tenants in a multi-story facility, a multi-story building that are using that they can capture and figure out how to leverage to get a higher use rate. So it's continually improving that intellectual capital, because it is continually getting updated with sensors, with renovations, with utilization of the facility. So, do we have a real example of a digital twin? I was putting this together, and I said, I sit here looking out for the 15th floor in Burbank, and it's Los Angeles. And for those of you out around the globe, I think most have heard the laments about traffic in Los Angeles, because Los Angeles really has very minimal public transportation. So this is a real-time digital twin that I live by daily, and I think as I travel the globe, whether I'm in Copenhagen or anywhere else, throughout Europe, in Asia, it doesn't really matter. Google Maps and tools such as this are showing us real time. This is a digital twin. It's feeding back from all the drivers on the road their speeds. It's feeding back the concentration of cars on a given section of road. It's feeding back all of this information, allowing me to decide, or maybe Google is going to suggest the optimum route to get from point A to point B. In this graphic, actually, this was taken real time. I just updated it yesterday before I finished this up, and you can see the red, being those, and even which lane, what direction they're heading, where the congestion is and what to avoid. So again, I thought this is a really succinct example of something that many of us use every day and would help draw some parallels to what a digital twin really is. This is a real-time example. Is there any other tech being used with digital twins in the industry? Well, again, glad you asked. Along with artificial intelligence. Now the buzzword, sorry, but maybe we'll have a whole talk on this later, but this covers a number of aspects, and I'm not going to go into those here. Machine learning, which is also complements or another type in some circles of artificial intelligence. IoT, Internet of Things. There we go. I brought in another acronym, IoT. Again, this is more what we might call disparate technology, but it's being used and leveraged in the facilities that we're designing, building, and managing every day. And I've mentioned this before. and I plan to have down the road a complete series on this. But Industry 4.0, if you haven't read about it, I'd really, again, we can't go into the depths here, but I really suggest that you might at least scan some articles and so forth about Industry 4.0, because it's coming to live with us. It's already living with us in a lot of ways. And I think that gives us some good insight and roadmap into it. So where's this whole use of digital twins going? You know, we get all this content, it comes into, you know, learning and machine language and gets used and put in case. With things such as artificial intelligence, with this common data environment, with these sensors, cognitive computing, it increases the abilities and everything about the digital twin that probably is even beyond us having a bank of people sit down and doing analysis of data of that facility. It really surpasses a lot what we can do from a human scale perspective. And that's actually where it's going. In some cases, some of the more sophisticated building types, some of the more mature industry segments, you know, back to aviation and so forth, even those are already leveraging these types of scenarios. Are we there yet? Another buzzword. I say it, we're currently in a state of chrysalis. So for those of you that don't know, chrysalis is this, it's kind of a unformed stage of a butterfly. They're caterpillars. They go into and they become in this chrysalis stage where they're really just they're really just a pod of slime. And in some ways, that's where we are. You know, we're still all defining this. We're still all learning about the inputs. So, you know, what goes into that, and in order to have the outcomes that are going to be needed and defined. And this is probably an infinite process. But a digital twin is a tool that leverages all that information about a facility today in order to inform us and create what will be done tomorrow in an infinite loop. It's never ending. And the key here for all of us to understand this, it's all based on digital content as assets. It has to have that digital content in order to even begin to put these other systems and layer these other management systems and information systems on top of. Without that, it can't exist. So it's incumbent on us. We're kind of the foundation of this whole piece that gets leveraged and utilized, and this is new. I mean, buildings have existed as long as man has. In maybe it was a cave, but what is new is this whole concept of having a complete operational digital parallel universe happening simultaneously in the built environment. So questions that were asked during the registrations, I think we've touched on most of them. I'm going to go through them, but before I do, and pardon the blank screen, I wanted to touch on one other aspect of the whole construction of the digital twin. It changes, and it's going to continue to change for stakeholders, each of us as actors in that, and because it is evolving. We are in the early days of this. So, you know, it really is incumbent on all of us across these disciplines that have largely been silos for most of the known existence, or at least the last century of this industry, to kind of break these silos down and really understand the impact that each of us plays on the others in order to really make the best out of this. So, Kat Van Dormelen, he's with Ask Romain in the Netherlands, wanted to know, when do you start making your digital twin, and when do you need to finish the as-built, or how we're going to build a model? Great question. I think, you know, I touched on this. The point here with this, Kat, is that it is an ongoing parallel process with the complete building life cycle. It is never finished. And when we start out, somebody doesn't pull out a mouse and a blank screen and say, I'm going to start the digital twin. Again, it's a collection. It's an ongoing collection. All of our work processes have to start addressing this and build this in, how this is going to get embellished at each stage of those silos for us to be able to have an effective outcome. Great question here. We get a lot of this about how to navigate the LOD of a digital twin of a piece of equipment, because it could include every nut, bolt, but not for buildings. Kathy Christensen out of Johnson Controls asked this. Great question, and we talk about this a lot in our content development for digital content for building product manufacturers. Not that it's a hard and fast rule, but my recommendation always is what's field serviceable. While often in the content production, we request step files maybe from the industrial designers systems that of a building product manufacturer that they use to design, engineer, and create their own individual pieces of equipment that become part of a digital facility. Anything that is not field serviceable, the rivets of an air handler, of a steel case would not be necessary. But knowing where the access panel is and having the access panels delineated and defined are really good. And I'm going to, Matthew, are you available? Because you deal with this a lot.
Yeah, I do.
What would you fill in what your answer would be to this question? Because I think you might have something a little different than myself.
So I think it really varies on the part of the cycle and the project that you're on, but also the building type. I've had some fascinating conversations with very large design and engineering organizations who, some of them are actually looking at building models at LOD 500. So for those of you who don't know, that's basically maximum geometric representation. So basically having models down to the millimeter accurate. The reason they want this is for things like really complex plant rooms. If you're working in the oil and gas industry, that sort of thing, where it's really important that we have a very high level of detail and information. But if you're designing a house, for example, just a single family dwelling, then that level of detail will be well over the top. But then it's interesting, if you're working on multi-use buildings, you could have a model which varies depending on zone, for example. So a zone for maybe a hotel room would be relatively low detail, but a zone for, again, the plant room which sits on top. Johnson Controls is a great example. How much detail really in a digital twin for a plant room do you need? There's no rules on this yet. I would say people are kind of playing around, and they're playing with different softwares and how that can work too. So it's very kind of, a lot of people have shown me kind of examples of quite basic, but also really advanced. So it's a good mix.
Yeah, I think one of the evolutions that we're going to see, become a lot more defined is in this area of level of detail, because different participants, different actors in the building life cycle have different needs for different information. Mm-hmm. So I think we're also going to see, often they're referred to as information exchanges, that you're seeing a filtered view. This concept of having this single model that has everything in it is not what a common data environment is. It's not what the digital twin is. That single model, that's back to what we were conditioned to a decade ago or more, 2 decades ago, of file-based thinking. We really have to move ourselves out of file-based thinking in terms of LOD and things like this, and go into information threading, where it's coming out, and we're, depending on our role, what we're needing, what we're involved in, what we see is filtered appropriately for what we need to do with that.
A really good example for that, Steve, would be defense. So we've done a little bit of work in the defense world on that, and kind of a lot of areas in defense, or prisons, for example. We had a great question from in prison design, where they were like, we will allow certain people to understand that the door has a lock, but only certain people can understand what that lock is. Because again, if you know what that lock is, there's that great series called Prison Break. And it's actually a really simple question to ask us as a construction world. But we, as a group of people, don't actually have a solution to kind of understand that level of information today. So yeah, the security and levels and how that works, you know, you could be a facility manager, but you can only see certain things, and you have to have a security clearance to see other things. That's a whole space where I would say there's no good solution today, but it is one which is being discussed, and it's very exciting to see those discussions.
So that's a great point. So every one of you on here, you're part of this solution. You're part of creating this, this how it's being done. Back to, you know, we are in that chrysalis stage. Holly Smith at Streamline in the USA said, how are digital twins hosted so building owners can access and update the data after handover? Well, again, I would encourage you to look at these, a couple of those articles, the GAFCON especially. They talk about it in general terms. I think this is still an area that's kind of, I'll call it the wide open Wild West, if that makes sense globally. It's not tightly defined yet. And I think with data services that we now have, cloud data services, there are numerous ones out there of the big players. And there's nothing secret about it. I mean, you know, Google, Oracle, Amazon, Azure, and on, IBM, they all have data, these data centers, these data stores that are able to host and house this. What that actually looks like in each case, we have some clients that we're not really able to name that at this point that have developed their own ways of collecting that data and having it accessed. But especially on the update after handover, again, it's back to what we discussed earlier in the slides. It's an ongoing infinite process. It's not a separate function from the repair being done. The repair being done actually updates the data, or the maintenance being done, or the being used actually updates it, counting people up and down a hallway in a given day. So is it possible to simulate aging, maintenance, or even end of life of a building system, as in a facade painting, using a digital twin? From Clever Temerick at BASF in Brazil asked. And the answer is yes, and that's being done now. Not only is it being done in the planning stages, in some of our other talks, we talked about this a little earlier on, computational fluid dynamics is one example of where it's simulating actual loading of people in, let's say, a movie theater with the temperature study done for that geospatially located facility, even the direction it's facing and how the sun might be impacting the cooling load on that. These types of things are being done in planning, but even through like a landscape aging, these are being done. There's tools out there. Twin Motion is one that you can emulate the aging in a lot of the landscape growth. And there was another question that was similar to this that came in about facade systems themselves. Here it was facade painting, but exterior cladding systems. All of these can be imposed in these virtualization type of environments, and in that digital twin can actually be tied in with weather data real time that's impacting it as it ages, knowing it knows how many days of X degree of sun exposure that baked finish may have, and anyway, it can monitor and manage all that. So a few more that we had. What's the differentiation of a digital twin versus a building model? Tim Kyer at U.S. General Services here in the USAS, and that's our GSA. They manage, for those of you that don't know, every government building and facility. Somewhere, Matthew has worked with the UK Ministry of Justice, so it's similar in some ways. So the building model is just an element of that digital twin. I spoke about this a little bit in the past. It's not a single entity. The digital twin is a collection of the building model. I like to call that the foundation, even though we talk about digital content as the foundation, as the currency of all this. That building model can have the IoT fabric of that laid on top of it. It gets all of these other inputs imposed on it with people flow and traffic and weather and all these things. So that would be, I don't know if that's a differentiation, but the building model is a subcomponent, if you will, of this digital twin. Got ahead of myself, impatiently stabbing at buttons on my keyboard. So how do we adequately address the LOD constraints and still provide a fully realized design when delivering a digital twin? Chris Innes with PM Group in Ireland. Matthew did a great job of addressing some of this. I think this is where we're going to see part of the project requirements evolving, at different points in the process about these LOD constraints. And again, I think that, I see that we are going to have to get out of file-based thinking and get into digital threading to understand and to really address this. And it's going to take away a lot of the weight right now that we call it, the file size. That is really of no concern, in today's volumes of petabytes of data that are able to be managed and accessed and worked with in seconds. But we're still trading files across disciplines, across our silos, and that's part of what's going to be changing, is getting into this a threading mindset, and that will allow back to the filters and so forth that we talked about earlier. Matthew, is there something else that you want to address on this?
Yeah, so kind of to jump in really what the world means by digital threading. I mean, the way that I explain it is that for all of you guys who have played computer games out there, which I'm sure there are a few of you, when you think about loading, think how big a city is, for example. So if you're wandering around a city, or you could be Super Mario or whatever, does a computer game load the whole city at once? No, it does not. It basically adjusts the digital representation the closer you get to it and where you are. And there's a drop off depending on. In the old days, when we used to run on like Commodore 64s and really old computers, we used to call it fog. So if you go and look at, there's some fascinating articles on how games have changed. Basically, you used to have a fog distance, and that's how they used to do it. So basically, you see a game fog. You can't see beyond a fog. We're not really doing that today in the digital world. If you think about when you load a design model today, you basically load the entire design model, and that is at a level of detail regardless of how far you zoom in or zoom out. Some softwares, AutoCAD used to do this. So AutoCAD, when you zoom in, it used to draw the circle nicer and nicer and nicer. You used to have to do the refresh. Like at some point, if you zoomed out, a circle used to be a triangle because it used to reduce the amount of lines. We're not there yet. So I think that's a really good example to use for those of you who don't understand what digital threading is, and also to have the information in different places as well. So again, you only see what you're allowed to see at certain details. And again, in all honesty, Steve may disagree with me now. I don't believe that tech in construction is there today. That tech in other industries is definitely there. But in our industry, it hasn't been applied yet.
Okay, sit down and buckle your seatbelt, Matthew, because you're going to be surprised that I'm going to say, yeah, absolutely, I agree with you 100%. And we've talked about this for years, especially at some of our AEC hackathons where we've been using. This is where, back to the acronyms, AR and VR, augmented reality, virtual reality, again, part of that digital twin experience. The game industry is way ahead of us. They are now the people that are writing these game engines, the Unities of the world, the Epic Games and Unreal engines of the world are being used heavily in this industry. And I call it, and we can make it another buzzword if you want, but I call it progressive viewing. So just as Matthew was articulating, as you're moving through a building, we don't need to see the doorknobs on a door that is 100 feet down the hallway when I'm in a virtual model. We shouldn't see the detail and where the keyhole is on that doorknob. But as progressively as we get closer to that, in that, and that's what games have been doing forever, and I think they're way ahead of us. But we don't need to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. It's already there. So that was a great point, Matthew. So I do agree with you. In this industry, we're not there yet, but I think that's progressive viewing is where we're going to end up going to address that, these monstrous LOD to get the data that is being demanded. So what's the biggest challenge and barrier in implementing a digital twin into the building and construction industry? Eliza Baumgart with Metnor in construction in the UK. I don't know if there's any single, and I'm going to ask you, Matthew, put your thinking cap on because I want you to answer this as well. But I don't know if there's any single specific challenge and barrier. I think the number one thing is all of us in this industry. Sometimes we're so focused on what we have to do today, and we do. That's important, and we have to manage that. But sometimes it's right in front of us, and so we can't see the real solution, which might be one leapfrog over where we are. I think that's our biggest challenge and barrier for all of us on this right now, day in and day out. We need to have that self-awareness throughout the day that maybe the next one I do, I can leapfrog this and go to the next level. Matthew, do you have any insight on this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the biggest challenge, and I actually think there is one, and I think it's education.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is not just education for those who have to deliver, but education for those who need to understand what they need to ask for. So I would say that there are very, very few. I mean, we work with as you've already mentioned, GAFCON, who works very closely with huge multinational companies. It's taking companies like that to educate clients, smart clients, and I would say that there are good examples of governments all over the world who are getting there to ask for something. I mean, basically, as an industry, we're still very disorganized, and we're basically making money off small margins, and we're only delivering what we need to deliver. We're not really taking many risks. The risk will come from us not being able to deliver what the client asks for. I think that's going to be the stick. I'd say the organizations who are delivering trying to deliver a digital twin, because I don't think it's possible today, for the client are seeing the carrot, the value. But I think it's education. I think that's always the biggest barrier with these sorts of things. I think it's people also are making digital twin very complicated. From a concept point of view, I don't think it is. I think it's amazingly simple because we have examples of digital twins in other industries.
Yes.
And we are actually working with digital twins, but you don't know it every day in how our devices work in our homes. It's already starting. You just don't think of it in that way. So yeah, I think education, personally.
Yeah.
That's
great.
That's what I say.
I think that's pretty much all the questions we had pre. Are there more questions, Matthew? Did we have anything that we need to address here?
We have some fantastic questions. Big thank you. Some people have asked multiple questions. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 10. So we have 12 minutes. So this is going to be a lightning round of questions. First one. Do you regard the focus on digital twins for buildings a natural progression through the rise of the digitization of construction? Does it make buildings smarter and more manageable? I think that's a simple yes, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a yes. But again, I think it's an evolution to get to that yes. That we're in that chrysalis stage right now, where it's still kind of mucky. It's undefined. It's uncomfortable. You know, it's not clearly defined for all of us. You know, it's whether you're, you know, this is your second day in this industry or your second century. We probably don't have many of those, but it's still uncomfortable because it's not tightly defined. But the GAFCONs of the world and others are working on that. So I think that's a yes for sure.
We've got questions about like file types and how heavy these files are, and are there any kind of standards? I mean, from my point of view, Steve, there is no standard, and there's not really a file type either, because you could, I mean, in theory, you could anything from a SketchUp model to a Revit file to a 3D PDF. It's not a file type from a traditional point of view. I mean, it goes back to your conversation about threading, I guess, about data flow.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you, Matthew, and I think that what one of the real reasons that is being defined, or it is undefined that way, is that we are in that shifting stage. We still, as this evolves, we can't just stop today what we've been doing for the last century and start anew for tomorrow or this afternoon. What we have to do is continue, and we are, I like to say, we're in a race, and we're the pit crew of the race car, and the building is the race car going around the track, but we got to change the tires while it's racing. We can't pull the building off and pause and rebuild it or put new tires on it. We have to do that while it goes around the track. So that's part of our challenge. So we're going to have these disparate file types, if you will, as Matthew pointed out, PDFs even. They're going to become part of that repository. The key is that we have, and again, another buzzword, and we use a lot, single source of truth. Where can every person go that's involved to find that information? And it may be in different formats with different apps for now. I think that's going to get more homogenized over time. It may never be totally homogenized, though. I think there will always be some disparate ways of storing, because some of the data needs to be used real time. Some of it is only referential material that may not be used that often. So even back to our progressive information we talked about in viewing, the same goes with the data. We don't need to have how many times a specific set of hinges on a specific door has opened and closed at our first query. That might tell us the life and when those hinges are going to wear out, possibly, and need to be replaced, but as an extreme example. But I think that there's no one file type to answer it.
So another question from Sean Hutchinson is a great question. It's, are there any digital twin standards? And I'm actually going to counter Sean, saying I think that's the wrong question, and I'll tell you why. What needs to happen, and what is actually happening, is it's not so much a digital twin standard. We as an industry need to have a data standard. So that is, we all need to agree how we write and communicate data with each other. I mean, that's basically how it should work. And if you think about how BIMobject works in that way, so basically we as a company are trying to bring to you a standard way that content works. And we need to bring to you a standard way that that data inside that content works, but not just us, everybody else that does that too. And we need to work with all the manufacturers to make sure that they deliver to us data in a standard way. There's a great example I used last year at Live when I talked about how do you describe size. So basically you can go away and you can describe size in 100 different ways. Length, overall length, length overall, etc. etc. We as an industry need to agree how we say things. We need to have a common dictionary. Because if you don't have that, basically there is no digital twin. I mean, because you can't, there is so much data involved, you can't map it manually every time. So, Sean, is there a digital twin standard? I don't think there will be. I think it's more to do with data standards, in my point of view. Steve, do you want to agree, disagree with me there?
I absolutely agree. There's really nothing I can add to that, Matthew. I think you pointed it out well. It is part of the still being discovered, and it's up to you guys, you folks on this call, to be part of that solution.
So the next question is the initial BIM model and the construction model. When is it classified as a digital twin? Now, in my mind, this is a difficult one. So I'm gonna punt a guess out here. What I think, if you think about it, even during the construction phase, we have a design intent model that goes to the contractor. The contractor will then do, maybe he will do his own, or maybe he'll modify it to a construction intent model. But as good as these models are, and as good as we do all the checks beforehand, something crazy is going to happen on site one day, and they're going to have to make a change. The digital twin is what's built at that point in time. So you could have a phased model, like a 4D model, like, okay, so we've done the core construction, that's a model. Technically, it's a digital twin because it's been what's built. I would say it's got to be true to what's been done. Digital twin is not a design intent model. Contractor goes and builds something else, and then you're kind of stuck with something weird.
Yeah, to me, it's an evolution. It's not anything, again, cut and defined up front. Also, one of the pieces that I was going to mention, again, there was so much content when I was developing this that we're already going to be over here. The scanning, drones, this is huge today, not just during construction, but almost day in and day out on a lot of these facilities and large complexes. And that's another thing that I wanted to point out that I didn't include, but it does make sense now, is that a digital twin can be of a single asset. It can be of a pump. But again, these are all, that pump builds up a system. So we have a digital twin of a fire suppression system possibly, and that system becomes part of a facility. It may be a university housing facility, and that particular building may become part of a campus, and that campus becomes part of a city. And you've all heard of digital cities and smart cities, so it all rolls up, and infrastructure even. This is all being planned using this data and information. So it is an evolution in that creation of those, and different pieces of them get used in different ways as they become part of a bigger system.
So I'm well aware of the time. There's quite a few more questions, so I apologize. I'm going to pick out kind of the ones that really do stand out, which I think is quite important. I quite like this question from Ruben. He asks how digital twins may be related to create predictive architectural design, and how they could be worked and used for uncompleted projects. I think that's a good question. I mean, the crazy thing about this industry is that we will build something and then we send in a bunch of surveyors to do an as-built survey. I think that's the first thing that we have to point out. What a total waste of time and money. And it's done for legal reasons. It's done for law, and it's done to basically make sure that there's no snagging list and you're not going to sue your contractor. It's quite bizarre. What would be really good from a digital twin point of view is that absolutely projects can be put on hold or only half built. Maybe you want to build another story on top of a building. How do you know if you can do that? I mean, you would have to go and do a survey today. You would have to pay a bunch of people scanning. Steve just said scanning is great, and drone scanning. We have to pay for all that at that point. I think if there was a good digital twin at the time, again, that would be an ideal world where we just go and build on top of something because we have the data. The lawyers might have a different argument, but hey, they always do.
Well, too often, Matthew, I think we differentiate ourselves from really basic, sophisticated manufacturing, which is really what we are. Yeah, there are some differences, but not nearly as many as we like to build in and build a cushion to let ourselves think, oh, we're different. We don't do that. We're different than aerospace. We're different than these others. Yeah, there are differences, but we are in the manufacturing business. We're manufacturing and maintaining facilities, and I think to the degree that we can start internalizing that in our thought processes, it'll help us and keep us relevant, because if not, it's not going to continue the way it has for years. It's changing, so let's be part of that change.
So I'm going to fly through two questions very quickly and then do the last one, and then we'll round up. So what available software supports digital twin? Really simple. Any BIM software today technically can be used. Is that used in the right way? Depends on your requirements, and it depends what the client wants. I mean, that's really down to what the client is asking you for.
And I say a lot of times it's not even a BIM software necessarily. It could be an app that a maintenance electrician is out doing either routine or out of range maintenance or repairs. He's using that app and using it and actually updates it real time. So it's not just a piece of software. In the digital twin, it's interacted with thousands potentially of types of software.
And I do. Alexander has done a comment here about the suitability of software. I think from his question, he's an electrical designer. I agree with him. I don't think the tools are really there today. I mean, if you think about the major tools that we're using in this industry for design, so basically Revit and ArchiCAD make up about 80% of the world's use. These softwares are old. Revit has been around since the late 90s. ArchiCAD has been around since the late 80s. These are not new tools. These are old tools that have been adapted to new workflows. So I think it's a challenge, but as an industry, we have to try and come together to see if we can resolve that challenge. And then the last one, which we touched on earlier, and I think this is a really good question, because actually this is where the legal aspect came in. And this is from Paulina, so thank you very much for this question. What are your views on the future of digital twin security? How should we be setting up the process and thinking about it? Who would be responsible? Because as everything moves to digital, it can be a major security issue. I think that is a great question.
Yeah.
And I would, again, I'm going to reflect on what I said earlier. So I have done work with the security sector for governments in a number of countries on both sides of the pond, been in meetings with, basically the Secret Service, where these are the kinds of the discussions that they're having. Basically, the governments and even people who, shopping centers is a really good example. So companies that's privately owned land, but they are a security risk of people. Unfortunately, we don't live in a safe world today. These are being discussed quite robustly inside the industry and by those who are responsible for delivering security and making people safe. Is there a clear answer? No. Is the digital threading a way to do it? As Steve mentioned earlier about only allowing certain people to see certain data. Yes. How do we do that? Well, there's all sorts of software that can be done. There's talk of people using blockchain and hyperledger technologies to record who views stuff in a digital space. There is no clear answer. It is a concern for everybody, especially when you talk about schools as well. It's just a huge, huge security risk. But to be positive, it's being discussed, and because the industry knows they need to go that way, and they just need to kind of just solve that issue.
I like to bring things to parallel to what we know, and I really see that this is that same case today. Most things are recorded in paper form, in written form. That's the least secure possible way possible. I mean, anybody that can read can understand, the mapping or anything in a paper-based 50 years ago system. Excuse me, those papers are not accessible to everyone. So in the same ways, the digital content is no different than the paper-based thinking and paper-based systems. We build fences, we build security features that make different versions of that same information available to the people that have the right credentials. Just like you can get into certain spaces of certain government facilities with certain clearances, same exact parallel is going to, I think, that's what we're going to see evolve and happen. It'll just be done with, as Matthew mentioned, using blockchain and things like that. Not cryptocurrency. A lot of people get that buzzword caught up. It's blockchain. It's distributed ledger technology. It's a whole nother, whole deeper. It's the foundation of that, information management. So I think it helps me visualize where we need to go with it. And I think we're going to see some of that happen as well. So that was pretty much it, Matthew, I believe.
That is.
And
I think I know you're going to run through some final points. I think this kind of topic, we've really kind of done it at a really high level today.
Yeah, we have to.
And I would say at BIMobject, we're learning as much as everybody else. I mean, this industry, the BIM industry in general, is in massive flux, and it's very exciting to see all these different things being done. There was a comment earlier about, and I think you, Steve, said it as well, we're moving into a data world. So Google, Amazon, Microsoft, they're definitely going to start stepping into this space. I feel that guys, ask more questions after this has ended, and I think Steve, we should review and maybe do maybe a couple more on digital twins. The interaction from the audience has been fantastic.
Yeah, well, to get through these real quick, to follow us, that there's upcoming on September 11th, we have another webinar, Learn to become an accredited BIMscript content developer. We do that one every month with our BIMscript global trainers, and that for you that want to create content or if you're a building product manufacturer and maybe want to have your internal industrial designers create BIM content, BIMscript is a great tool to do that with. That's coming up. But then on the 18th, I purposely don't predetermine, because we get so much information in from you guys, that you folks that are on these talks, we have not determined it. So Matthew and I will, after this, we'll look at your suggestions that come in, because please fill out the survey after the webinar. That's one of the things we ask. What other topics do you want to know more about, and any other questions that you may have? So you can help us deliver more of what you need. This is a discussion. It's not meant to be one-sided, and even some of you we're going to be looking at bringing on and having virtually sit next to us or have some discussions a little deeper with people that are actually in the day-to-day weeds of certain pieces of this industry. So you tell us what's going to be on the next BIMobject Talks with Steve Holzer on September 18th. That's 2 weeks out. We'll get that put together and get you notice for it. So thanks a lot for hanging on, Matthew. Great job. Thanks for being there to help us spread the word. If any of you love this so much you want to hear a similar presentation again, we'll be on at 11 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, which is, I think, a scant 8 hours from now. So we do run these twice on these webinar Wednesdays every week. So also you can actually register for that on the same email that you registered for this one. So possibly if you are still awake and want to be on it, we can get some of your questions in there as well if you brought up some other questions we didn't get to today. Anything else you have, Matthew?
Nothing more. Just have a great day, guys. Enjoy your day wherever you may be sitting in the world.
Yes. Thank you all. Thanks for being with us and for making this more informative by your involvement. We'll see you again next time.
See you soon. Cheers, guys.